team. Lead versus Fox. Preston Parker. Lead versus Mario Brothers. Lead versus Pikachu. Lead versus Giant Donkey Kong. For the platform. Lead versus Kirby team. Lead versus Samus. Lead versus Metal Mario. Race to the finish. Lead versus Fighting Polygon team. Congratulations! Captain Falcon versus League! Captain Falcon versus Yoshi team! Captain Falcon versus Fox! Preston Parker! Captain Falcon versus Mario Brothers! Captain Falcon versus Pikachu! Captain Falcon versus Giant Donkey Kong! For the platform! Captain Falcon versus Kirby team! Captain Falcon versus Samus! Captain Falcon versus Metal Mario! Race to the finish! Captain Falcon versus Fighting Polygon team! Congratulations! Pikachu versus League! Pikachu versus Yoshi team! Pikachu versus Fox! Preston Parker! Pikachu versus Mario Brothers! Pikachu versus Pikachu! Pikachu versus Giant Donkey Kong! For the platform! Pikachu versus Kirby team! Pikachu versus Samus! Pikachu versus Metal Mario! Race to the finish! Pikachu versus Fighting Polygon team! Incredible! Samus versus League! Samus versus Yoshi team! Samus versus Fox! Preston Parker! Samus versus Mario Brothers! Samus versus Pikachu! Samus versus Giant Donkey Kong! For the platform! Samus versus Kirby! Samus versus Samus! Samus versus Metal Mario! Race to the finish! Samus versus Fighting Polygon team! Congratulations! Jigglypuff versus League! Jigglypuff versus Yoshi team! Jigglypuff versus Fox! Preston Parker! Jigglypuff versus Mario Brothers! Jigglypuff versus Pikachu! Jigglypuff versus Giant Donkey Kong! For the platform! Jigglypuff versus Kirby team! Jigglypuff Jigglypuff versus Fighting Polygon Team. Incredible! Fox versus Link. Fox versus Yoshi Team. Fox versus Fox. Break the target. Fox versus Mario Brothers. Fox versus Pikachu. Fox versus Giant Donkey Kong. For the platform. Fox versus Kirby Team. Fox versus Samus. Fox versus Metal Mario. Race to the finish. Fox versus Fighting Poly. Congratulations. Luigi versus Link. Luigi versus Yoshi Team. Luigi versus Fox. Break the target. Luigi versus Mario Brothers. Luigi versus Pikachu. Luigi versus Giant Donkey Kong. For the platform. Luigi versus Kirby Team. Luigi versus Samus. Luigi versus Metal Mario. Race to the finish. Luigi versus Fighting Polygon Team. Congratulations! Kirby versus Link. Kirby versus Yoshi Team. Kirby versus Fox. Break the target. Kirby versus Mario Brothers. Kirby versus Pikachu. Kirby versus Giant Donkey Kong. For the platform. Kirby versus Kirby Team. Kirby versus Samus. Kirby versus Metal Mario. Race to the finish. Kirby versus Fighting Polygon Team. Congratulations! Donkey Kong versus Link. Donkey Kong versus Yoshi Team. Donkey Kong versus Break the target. Donkey Kong versus Mario Brothers. Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong versus Giant Donkey Kong. For the platform. Donkey Kong versus Kirby Team. Donkey Kong versus Samus. Donkey Kong versus Race to the finish. Donkey Kong. versus Yoshi Team. Mario versus Fox. Break the target. Mario versus Mario Brothers. Mario versus Pikachu. Mario versus Giant Donkey Kong. For the platform. Mario versus Kirby Team. Mario versus Samus. Mario versus Metal Mario. Race to the finish. Mario versus Fighting Polygon Team. Congratulations! Nash versus Link. Nash versus Yoshi Team. Nash versus Fox. Break the target. Nash versus Mario Brothers. Nash versus Pikachu. Nash versus Giant Donkey Kong. For the platform. 5, 4, 3, complete. Nash versus Kirby Team. Nash versus Samus. Nash versus Metal Mario. Race to the finish. Go! Nash versus Fighting Polygon Team. Congratulations! Yoshi versus Link. Yoshi versus Yoshi Team. Yoshi versus Fox. Break the target. Yoshi versus Mario Brothers. Yoshi versus Pikachu. Yoshi versus Giant Donkey Kong. For the platform. Yoshi versus Kirby Team. Yoshi versus Samus. Yoshi versus Metal